Welcome to Teens Behind the Scenes webinar series. My name is Lindsey R. Barr. I'm a dramaturg for the Teens Behind the Scenes program. Teens Behind the Scenes is a program of the National Theater Foundation dedicated to providing teens in the Washington, D.C. area with access to Broadway touring productions and professional insight into performing arts careers. In this series, we interview theater professionals to learn more about what they do, how they do it, and how they got to where they are now. So joining me today is María De Barros, and we'll be talking about stage management. So María, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Of course. Thank you, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. My name is María De Barros. I go by she, her pronouns. And I'm a stage manager currently in the New York City area. I'm currently working on Cabaret as a sub-stage manager. That means that I come in and out as needed, kind of like an understudy standby situation in terms of acting. And I just graduated from Columbia University with my master's degree in stage management this past May.
Yes, congratulations on graduating with your MFA, María. That's huge. A little bit more about your background. How did you end up in stage management? Like, what path did you take here? What sort of schooling did you do? You just mentioned your master's degree, but feel free to expand on anything that feels really relevant and exciting there.
For sure. So growing up, I was in a lot of theater work. I performed a lot, like ever since I was like in elementary school, and it was always something that I really loved. It was something that I loved also watching and like listening to. It was something that always appealed to me. In high school, I was obsessed with like being involved in all the theater programs, all the clubs. And I got to do a lot of acting there as well as I had before. But moving into high school, you also got the opportunity to work backstage more. And I think by the time that I hit my like junior year of high school, I kind of was done with acting, but I wasn't done with theater. So I wanted to explore other avenues of production. So I did some costume design, I did some set design, I did some like tech work, general tech work, I did directing, writing, I tried everything. But I ended up stage managing quite a bit because I felt like it was something that resonated with both the involvement that that position had in a production, which like as a stage manager, you do follow the company, the acting company quite a bit, and you're with the process from the beginning of the way that the show comes together. And also I was like very overachieving in my academics. So it was like something that just really worked logistically in my brain. It felt really natural to me. And then going into college, I didn't really want to do theater initially. I had continued applying with theater in mind to get scholarships. And thankfully, like that worked. I got accepted into a couple of universities, but I ended up choosing University of Maryland. They were one of the universities that gave me both an academic and theatrical-based scholarship. And going in, I wanted to do something else, so I double majored, and I was like so set on like, I'm just doing theater for fun. I'm doing theater for the scholarship. I don't really intend on like pursuing it professionally. And then I didn't like my other major, so I tried another one, and I didn't like that one either. And then I tried another one, and I did not like that one either. But theater was the constant that I always enjoyed. I remember actually being put in like a majority of theater classes in my first year by my academic advisor. And I was initially really bummed out, but I was like, these are the only classes I ended up liking. So thankfully that kind of opened my eyes to, oh, I can do this professionally. And I learned that, I remember even in high school, I got a couple of awards for stage management, and that's something that you're not really like aware of going into it. Like you're aware of awards you can get from doing science things or doing business things. But I didn't realize that there was such a big opportunity field for stage management and working backstage. So thankfully in Maryland, University of Maryland, there were the support that you got in terms of design and the scale of the productions was ginormous. And I don't think a lot of schools get that. And I was so lucky to be involved in those main stage productions, as well as the other seasons that they had that were more student run. But I had learned so much from being able to work on these like basically like I'd say regional / off Broadway level performances at the University of Maryland. And I had two wonderful teachers for my first 2 years. It was Carrie Gillette. And then my second 2 years was Dunn Schwartz. And they were both the production managers of Maryland. And they really facilitated and supported a cohort of stage managers. And we would just like meet all the time and talk like I think once a week we'd have like these group meetings. There were classes, and it was just, even though it was a general theater program, it felt very tailored to my goals and my interest in being a stage manager. So I think by the end of my first year, I was pretty confident that I was going into this field professionally. So I started looking for opportunities during college that would help me like build my resume up. I looked first like locally at I'm from Florida, and there is a theater called Small Jupiter Theater. It's actually like a pretty big regional theater there. They do like lots of flashy, big, expensive productions, which is exactly what I wanted to like learn about. So I was able to work with them over the summer, and then I would go back again during the winter break and work there again. Like I was working nonstop by my own choice, wanting to be exposed to the professional theater world. And then in my second summer when college happened, I was able to go to do some summer stock type work up in the Berkshires. And a lot of folks might talk about like the Berkshires in the summer as kind of like an important growing point in your career, because there's so much theater happening during that time. There's so many opportunities, and there's so many fellowships open there. And I worked at Barrington Stage Company, which was really awesome. They're a pretty big company out there in the Berkshires. And I just learned so much from the stage managers that I worked with there. I did like 4 shows, I think, in 2 months, which is really exciting. I got to meet so many people. And yeah, I just really tried to get all of those opportunities whenever I wasn't working in school. And you know, those school schedules were hard because you're taking classes from like 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., but then you have rehearsals from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. But it really helps you understand. It's run so well and so professionally that it really gave me a great foundation to work upon, that when I took my skills to a professional level, it was very easily translated. And the scale of the productions really helped with that. After that, I think it was my junior year when COVID hit. And that was really rough because, you know, I had been looking, I was looking to like continue building upon like what I had been doing. So like whatever the next step was, I was ready to take it. But COVID hit, and that kind of threw everyone for a loop. And I initially wanted to stay in the DC theater scene, and that changed a bit as I thought about my life during the pandemic. I had the opportunity to do virtual theater, which was lovely, and really, you know, I was able to make some really great connections. There was a lot of networking opportunities that happened remotely. And so by my senior year of college, I was still doing shows at Maryland. And I didn't think I wanted to work at DC theater anymore. I was looking at Chicago, New York City. And then by like halfway through the year, I was like, you know, I don't know what's going to happen in life. I don't know what's next for the world. So I'm going to go to grad school because I feel like that'll be one of the most stable things that I'm able to do during this time. That's so impossible to know what's coming up next. So I chose to go to grad school. I only applied for Columbia University, which is located in New York City. They have a stage management specific MFA program. And I think it was one of the few schools that was actually accepting applications, because they had paused a couple of their programs, a couple universities had, in order to give that class like a full year instead of a half hybrid year. So I went into that time hoping for the best. And I ended up getting accepted into the program, which was wonderful. The program really fit with my like needs of wanting to grow professionally, but also to find a cohort of like-minded individuals, or not like-minded, like diverse individuals who had like similar values that I could learn from and I could teach as well. So I ended up going to grad school. Before I entered grad school, though, I actually got asked by the Public Theater to interview to be on the team of Merry Wives, which was the first show in New York City back from the pandemic. And I said, sure, I'm going to New York anyway. I would just need to move earlier. And I ended up interviewing with Meredith E. Alcorn, who is this really renowned stage manager who's funnily enough, the head of Yale stage management. And we ended up getting along really well, and I got an opportunity to work there. So I moved to New York City early. I literally did not go to graduation. I only attended the virtual graduation from a hotel room in New York City because I really wanted to be involved in this project. Because I think it's a lot of people's dreams to work at the Public Theater, especially as somewhere as iconic as the Park. So I got that opportunity, and it was a great way to start out my career in New York before I even started grad school. And yeah, that was a lovely, wonderful opportunity. Narda is now like one of my biggest mentors, and I adore her. And then I started classes as I was finishing up that production at Columbia. And ever since then, Columbia University has like a 2-year program, or 3-year program, technically 2 years with classes, 1 year without. And it's more of a like thesis writing, internship level work that you do during that time. And so as I took these classes that were heavily theoretical, but also we as a cohort and with the professors were able to converse about so many things that were rapidly changing in our industry, because after the pandemic, there was a shift culturally as well as logistically, which brought along, it was like a lot of good change, but it was nice to have a platform where we could talk about it. And I learned so much from my peers, and I hope that I taught them as well from my own perspective. And during that time, I was able to work professionally during my breaks. There were times where I was able to manage to do school and work. I had worked on a couple of workshops. Over the summer, I had worked in, trying to think, oh my goodness, what did I do that summer? Yeah, I did a lot of workshops. I worked with Disney Theatricals for a summer, which was magical. I love them. Really great company to work with. And I learned so much from them. I had worked with the Public Theater a bit more too, second stage theater, like a lot of off-Broadway theaters. In my second year, I got my Broadway debut by working on a one-man show called Walking with Ghosts, where I was the production assistant and also the sub-stage manager. In theater, stage management, specific to New York City theater, there's a position called production assistant, and that's kind of like the entry-level position as a stage manager. Kind of explaining the breakdown of it all. The production stage manager is the person who's in charge of the stage management team, core person with scheduling, with talking to creatives. And then under them is the first assistant stage manager. And that person is the person who is heavily intertwined with what's going on the deck, like on stage and backstage, coordinating all like these physical things as opposed to scheduling logistics. And that person is very much on the ground, on their feet, doing all the stuff that has to do with props, costumes, scenic, coordinating stuff with crew. And then depending on the production, it varies on like whether it's a play or a musical. There's going to be like a second assistant stage manager, and then maybe a third shows with fourth. It all depends on how difficult a show is. But then after that, it kind of, all those folks are all on contract. But the production assistant is someone who's usually there from the start of rehearsals to opening. And that's, you can see that kind of structure sometimes in Chicago, sometimes in DC, but it is like almost guaranteed in New York City theater. And so I had managed to do a lot of production assistant work during that time. And one of the things that I always did is I always kept looking. If I was working, I was talking to people to make connections. I was seeing what shows were coming up to see if I was interested in anything, to reach out to the people, to the companies who are related to them, to, you know, make a connection and hopefully make it happen eventually. And then as my third year approached, in Columbia, I worked on Buena Vista Social Club over at the Atlantic Theater, and then I got on Cabaret. And I've been at Cabaret since February. Again, I started as a production assistant and then eventually got onto a contract to be a sub-stage manager. And I'm there quite a bit. And yeah, it really is wonderful. I graduated, like I literally went to a matinee and then that evening I graduated. And it was, you know, like I wanted to do it. Like I was very down. It just felt right. And yeah, this summer I have a couple things coming up. I'm going to work with Prospect Theater Group on an immersive production. I just finished a workshop with Disney Theatricals again. And then this fall, I should be working on another Broadway production that's coming up as a production assistant. And then we'll see what happens. That's kind of how I got here professionally.
Yeah, you've had such a incredible career so far,
Yeah.
right? And I think that I mean, for like transparency's sake, right? Like we met working on a production of one of those virtual productions in the middle of the pandemic, right? And you were in undergrad and I was in grad school, and it was a learning experience for all of us on the team, right? Who are navigating this. Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Mac. It was a learning experience for all of us, right? Because we're trying to figure out what this is. But I just remember, and I want to get into a little bit of like, what is stage management? Because you've started teasing it a little bit. But in that particular venue, I remember you being incredibly competent and confident and thoughtful about figuring out what stage management needed to be in this new process, right? So before we talk a little bit about that, I'd love it if you've started to talk a little bit about the structure of stage management, and you've pointed to a lot of the different roles and a lot of the different jobs that stage managers can have. And so if you were to distill down, like, what does a stage manager do? Like, what's your elevator pitch for what stage management is?
For sure. I think you said it really well. In terms of like trying to figure out what stage management needed to be in the moment when we were working virtually. I think that's true for every show. Of course, there's like its basics. As a stage manager, I remember saying this in my interview for University of Maryland, and I felt so silly for saying this, but Carrie ended up using it a lot. So it seemed like I tuned into her brain. She asked me to say what stage management was in one sentence. And I said, stage management is the glue of theater, which I felt so embarrassed to say in the moment, but I later learned was 100% correct. It truly is like you are the connection, like of all of the elements coming together. You are connecting, you are coordinating all of these different aspects: costume, set, props, safety, automation, if your show has automation, lighting, sound. You are getting all of these different aspects together, or connecting them to the creatives, to the director, the associate director, the dramaturg, the music director, and then connecting it to the company to make sure that there is like this ever supportive cycle of communication and of like kind of like a well-oiled machine. That's the goal, for it to be all connected. And as a stage manager, no matter what position of stage management you're in, communication is key, and communication and connection, and making sure that everything is always being communicated to your best ability. I think stage management also is responsible, you know, for a lot of logistics of like, when are we doing this? What time are we called? What time does the day end? what am I writing? Like as a stage manager, you write like a record of the day every day. You know, you're sending out emails constantly. And that is all part of the biggest goal of making sure the show happens. Um, Myself as a stage manager, and I think a lot of people in the profession agree, the number one and most important thing is like safety, and making sure that everybody's safe. And that doesn't always mean like physical safety. It also means like mental safety, emotional safety, just making sure that everyone is to your best ability, safe and healthy. Again, you cannot control anybody's emotions. The ability to anticipate potential issues and find ways of fixing those problems or doing whatever you can to make it better so that people are happier. And, you know, like you want ideally a room, a rehearsal room, or a building, a theater building. Ideally, those people, the creatives and the company should be able to have as much fun, as much play, as much joy as possible. And as a stage manager, if you do your job right, I feel like you're able to make that happen, to make sure that everyone's clear on what's going on, to make sure that everybody knows all the risks involved with something that might be dangerous. Even if it's just like, you know, putting tape on stairs so that people see it better after coming up off stage, or telling someone that, hey, there's going to be a hole in the floor during the song, make sure that you steer away from it. It really is just about anticipation of needs and support. I think as a stage manager, you really have to be a team player and down for whatever. And in a way that's like, you kind of have to, it's a lot of improv. It's a lot of improv. You have to roll with the punches. You have to do whatever's being asked of you in a way that's, you know, quick, but still accurate. There's a lot of layers to stage management, but I feel like being aware of your position and like the power and responsibility that you have and not being scared of it, but of like using it to make the space the best it can be. I think that's super important.
Yeah, I really love your description of sort of the stage manager being the glue of theater, because it feels like you have your hands on a lot of different things and you become, as a stage manager, like the central communication point for the production, right? And making sure that like everyone knows where they're going, all of the elements are working together. And there's also something that I have always found really lovely about stage management after a show opens, which I'm wondering if you can speak to, right? Which is, so you're talking a lot about like in the rehearsal process and when you're doing things like that. But once the show opens, I always find it really moving that the stage manager sort of becomes the person who maintains the integrity of the show, right? So making sure that like the way that a director directed a scene, the way that this fight choreography needs to happen each night, right? Like to speak to safety, and that like the stage manager is really the person who's making sure that the show as it was conceived by the director and the creative team sort of lives on after they sort of move off the project. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit, right? Like the technicalities of like, what does it mean to make sure that that stays the same and safe?
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like as a stage manager, especially like in the position of a production stage manager primarily, but I think all levels of stage management are able to take this on. There is a level of like attention and understanding that you have to have of the art in order to be able to carry that out of the maintenance of a show. So like during rehearsals, it's important to not just be there and present for the people who are there and for, you know, making sure that breaks are called on time and whatnot, and taking down all like the information that's happening. But it's also important to listen in to what the director is saying, and listen in on table work and listen in on the notes that they're giving actors. Like those things are so important while you're in the rehearsal process. Like if you're also taking a show, like listening into the conversations of creatives of why is this light cue being here? Not like, when do you want me to call this light cue, but what is the goal of this light cue? What is the what is the intention of this light cues, just so that you know what the point of it is. I think that's super important. So you have to really be open to that. And I know a lot of stage managers like have different approaches to getting that information into their heads. But for that one specifically, it is, to me, just paying attention and really grabbing onto it and having a full understanding of the production, not just technically, but also artistically. Depending on the show, you might have like an associate director / resident director that's there basically every day and helping you with those needs of putting in understudies or rehearsing understudies, rehearsing swings, and rehearsing people who are new to the show into the show. More and more, it's more common to find these resident directors on, at least in New York City theater, as well as like the music director being there, if it's a musical, and being able to give notes about vocal things and music things. There's also associate choreographers / resident choreographers who are there. If those people are there, you are part of that team you work together to make sure that the production continues being what it is. And it's not like they're in their own lane. Like, you guys are very much a team of maintaining the show, because once the show opens, and if it's a long running show, or even if it's a show with a limited run, like, the director is probably going to leave after the first week, after you open, usually earlier. So it really is your responsibility to make sure that everything happens the way that it was intended to happen. And there might be changes, and in order to maintain that original intention, because people act differently and people perform differently and people are different people, and that's okay as long as like that was approved and you understand why that's happening. If there is no support team like that, there are some shows that still don't have support teams, then the stage management team is in charge of running rehearsal while the show is still happening each night. You have rehearsal probably 2 times a week, where you teach the actors their blocking, where they go on stage. You help with the choreography. Usually there's a dance captain there, the person in the company that's in charge of making sure that dance looks good every night. They usually are there to help you. But yeah, you really have to, you kind of, sometimes traditionally stage management kind of forms into a form of directing, if there is no other resident director there. And you are, sometimes if there is no resident director, then the stage manager has to watch the show and from the audience and note it, meaning you have to take, and that's when you call back upon your knowledge of what the director said 100 days ago about why Bob is getting that apple in that very moment. Like, you really have to have an understanding of performance in order to give those notes. And you still, like, even if there is that backup team, that team of directing support, you still have to be cognizant of those choices. You still have to understand why that's happening. And it'll just give you a greater understanding of the production as a whole, and like your leadership will be better. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And that's helpful. And I haven't heard anyone in all the theater that we've done, and I've done, certainly, I haven't heard a stage manager say that so explicitly, of like, understanding the objectives of something, just like the actors have to understand their objectives for a scene, right? Like, that makes total sense when you say it out loud. But I've just never heard anyone say that so explicitly. So that's really enlightening. So you mentioned that you're a sub right now for the Broadway production of Cabaret. What does that look like? What are you doing at this point now that the show is open and on Broadway and audiences are coming to see it? What happens when you get called in to stage manage that show?
Yes. So in long running productions, there are usually at least 2 deck stage management tracks, meaning, so sorry, I'm getting a call from sorry, just had to mute that. There's different deck tracks, right? So there's different paths that somebody has throughout a show with different cues and different things that they're looking at and seeing. And you kind of have to learn those tracks. And so there's a period of training that you have where you learn, where you go, where you have to be. In a Broadway show, there's a union crew, meaning crew members are the only ones allowed to touch the things that are under their jurisdiction, meaning wardrobe can only touch their costumes, props can only touch the props, scenic people, carps can only touch the scenic elements in that moment, do scenic cues like paging curtains. So you really, as a stage manager on Broadway, don't really have any physical cues like that. Like you do not have those cues where you have to like hand off a prop, like you might in off Broadway, or you might in regional theater. That doesn't happen. It is, your cues are to watch, to make sure that things are happening, to make sure things are safe, to make sure, like, you might have a flashlight cue where, you know, somebody has to go down the stairs and they need more view because they're coming out of a dark theater, you know? And so it's mostly like, I've learned all these different tracks, and depending on the track, I'm called at a different time. And then I come in and I do my track. And, you know, sometimes it's pre-scheduled, sometimes it's not. It can be last minute, and that's totally fine. You just have to like be ready and review your notes, because you might be out of a show for a couple weeks. So you have to make sure that you're studying, kind of like an actor studies their lines. You also have to study like your run sheet, your paperwork, that tells you where to go and where to be at each time and what you're looking for. There's a lot of, since if you're working in a union house, in a union theater, there's a lot of watching and making sure that everything is safe, because a couple of people have their eyes on it, but everybody's watching for a different reason, from a different angle. So it's important that your eyes are on those things. And yeah, like always looking to see how you can support that team, especially if you're not on that team full time. You know, there are things that you might be able to help with in terms of small tasks or in terms of follow through. It really does depend.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what it means to call a show, which is perhaps what a lot of people in high school or college might be most familiar with when we're thinking about stage management.
For sure. So as a production stage manager, going back a little bit, when it's tech, meaning you have moved out of the rehearsal studio and you are now in the theater, and let's say usually there's like a day or two where you're able to just space without any tech. Like actors get to put the show on the stage, but without any like elements. After that's all done, sometimes at the end of rehearsal, the production stage manager, it depends on the show, it really does depend on the show, are able to do dry tech, where they do tech with just the creatives and the designers and no cast. So you kind of have started to know when certain cues are happening on stage. So when you go see a show, if there's any lights, any sounds, any automation, which is when things move, not done by man, but done by machine. Like if you ever, a lot of Broadway shows have turntables where the stage spins, or people might come up and out of the floor. That's all automation. Those things do, all of that is called by the stage manager, meaning they say when those things happen to people who are operating said machinery, and those people do not click the button, G-O, the go button, until the stage manager says the word go. So while you tech a show, you are essentially putting in those cues on where they go, how fast they go, what color they are, what volume they are. And so you as a production stage manager are driving tech in the way of like, okay, lights, tell me where this goes. Great, awesome. Putting it into the book, you put it into the script, and then you're able to call it again as intended. And obviously throughout tech and previews, there's a lot of change, and there's a lot of, different things that happen. But eventually, when you get to a place where the show's open, you pretty much have this script that has all the cues in it, and you are able to call the show. Meaning now every night, this light cue is always going to happen when Freddie says the word angel. And you know that because it's written out in your book. And you are saying it out loud as it happens into your headset. So that's kind of what calling a show is. And they're like, yes, it's all on paper, but also, again, safety is the number one aspect. So you have to make sure that people are actually where they need to be. Because if you call an automation cue or a rail cue, and this actor is right under where said piece of scenery is going to come to, you cannot call it until they are clear. And then also if there's an emergency on stage, if there's like something crazy that happens last minute, that's when you have to be like, okay, like, let's pause. Sometimes there's technical holds in shows. It's not rare. And sometimes it's like beyond your control. Sometimes it's somebody in the audience. So you really do just have to be cognizant of everything at all times. Like you can't just cruise through it. Like it's important to be engaged 100% of the time to make sure that any element is not out of place and everything is running as intended, because otherwise, people could get into some serious danger. And luckily, I feel like every stage manager that I've worked with is very aware of that and has never just phoned it in. They're really, I have the best mentors ever. But I've learned from them. You really do have to be present, the way that an actor has to be present and engaged at all times when they are on stage. It's the same thing when you're calling the show, from whether it is up in a booth somewhere or backstage in the wings somewhere. You have to be engaged and you have to be in the show.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that you were saying that, right? Because it's important that a lot of times what we see in the audience, right, is what seems like a really perfectly well-oiled machine. And hopefully it is, but you're calling up that like, we're also human, we're also fallible, right? And if we don't hit our marks, there has to be someone who says like, okay, the show can't go on because it's not safe, or the show can go on and we need to wait 5 seconds, or we need to, that cue needs to go into a different spot, right? So even though we would love for it to happen perfectly and exactly as we want it to, that's not the reality of the show. And the stage manager is really the person who gets to make those decisions, and the presence is really important for that, as you're saying. Is there anything that you find to be a particular challenge in stage management? And I don't mean challenge as like a negative thing, right? It can be like a really exciting challenge you run into all the time, or there might just be a part of stage management you're like, I don't mind doing it, but I always find like a tension with having to do it. Is there anything about that you run into?
I think there's plenty of things that I could talk about, but I think you just mentioned, being human and making mistakes. And as true as it is for the actors and the director, it's also true for stage managers. And I feel like there are some before, there are many different, stage management has a long history. And, some people, some schools of thought believe that, stage managers should be perfect. And, some people, still both actors, creatives, whoever alike, have the idea that stage managers should be perfect. And, stage managers have taken that in, some have, and some are perfectionists and, hold themselves up to a really high standard. But it's so important to remember that we're all human and that we all make mistakes just as much as the other person. And I think you should be kind to yourself at all times and make it okay for you to make mistakes and for you to not be perfect all the time. Really not beating yourself up over things, because then that just makes things worse. Like that just makes you worse. Like it makes the rest of the night, like you're going to be messing up if you really beat yourself up for one mistake. So you really just have to learn how to make a mistake and move on. And, ultimately, yes, you should be able to do a better job next time and like learning from the mistake, like taking errors and making them learning moments, I think is so important. And there's still people out there who might still ask perfection from you. And that's always hard. And like, I think as a production stage manager, you have to be on 24/7. You are getting calls at all times. You are getting emails at all times. And you have to set your boundaries of when are you off? When will you not reply? When are you going to wake up? When do you stop answering emails at night? And everybody has a different journey with that. But you're allowed to make that your own personal journey, and you're allowed to make that your own personal outline of what you think your job should be and like what your boundaries are. So it is hard when, act like the same way that actors, the rehearsal that actors get in the rehearsal room, stage managers don't get with their calling of shows. They don't get with their tracks running backstage. You never really get a rehearsal. And that's just really, we don't really think about that. And so just like an actor is able to make a mistake, if they were only able to rehearse through the show once, we're able to make those mistakes. And, you learn from those mistakes and you do a better job next time. And that's completely fine. So I guess the one thing is the expectation of perfection. And then how do you respond to that? And if you're able to respond to that with like care and love for yourself and for others, I really do think it's okay to make mistakes as long as you're accountable. You take responsibility and you learn. That's what you said brought that up.
Yeah, and I'm glad because I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I think that you and I worked together during the pandemic on this virtual production, as we mentioned, and it was a huge learning curve. And I was a dramaturg, right? So coming at it from a very different angle, but I have vivid memories of it was a really challenging process, not because anyone made it particularly challenging, just because of what we were dealing with, right? We were in a pandemic. We were all doing this for the first time. There was a really expansive team with a very specific vision. And you and I would be on the phone sometimes late into the night, like after rehearsal, trying to figure out like, how do we approach this within our particular roles? Like, how can we work together? How can we sort of undo in a lot of ways, or go up against with gentleness and kindness, the expectations that this show needs to happen a specific way, right? And I remember those being really, really helpful conversations for me as a dramaturg with you, right? To be like, we have to unpack that, like, not only is every piece of theater different and demands a different process, but this one in particular demands us to really step back and ask, like, what does this process need, right?
Yeah.
And how do we show up for this process? And that doesn't look like perfection. And this isn't going to be the show that maybe we thought it was going to be 2 months ago. And that has to be okay, right? Yeah. And that was, I was in grad school at the time and had done dozens of shows at that time, but it was a really humbling experience, right? To be like, we have to change all of this, and that has to be okay. And like, I just remember having a lot of really good phone calls with you late into the night about like, okay, how do we show up for rehearsal tomorrow? Right? Like,
and that's so true, like professionally too, like in that process, there are so many different stakeholders, right? Both in like the stakeholding of design, the direction, the acting experience. And that's so true here. And like in the professional world, like, and you can never make all stakeholders happy. Like 100%, you cannot give everyone 100% what they want at all times. So you have to make the decision of what is going to make most sense in terms of this production, in terms of keeping people safe at the bare minimum, safe and healthy. Those are the like, what baseline, what needs to happen. And then everything else, your decisions, what you have to do may not make everyone thrilled, and that's okay. And you have to learn to live with that. And I feel like we were able, like, it's all about compromise. And in that production, there was a lot of compromise made. And I feel like ultimately everybody eventually got what they wanted. But there was a lot of things that needed to happen in order for us to get there. And like, not everyone is going to be happy like it might happen in waves, right? Like person A gets their thing achieved, but person B might not get that until later. And just not taking anything personally is so important. And like you get, as a stage manager, and a lot of other professions in theater, but speaking specifically about stage management, you are at the front, like at the front of everybody's emotions and at the front of everybody's reactions. And you just have to nod, listen, and not internalize it, because 99% of the time it's not about you. It's always about the other person or about something else that is completely out of your control. And you can make that clear too. You can say, I am not a part of this decision making. I am simply delivering this message. I'm sorry that you feel like that way. You're valid. Your emotions are valid. I will do what I can from my end, but there is only so much I can do. If you want to talk to the person who's making the decision, you are free to do so. So it's just important to not take things personally, and also understand no one is ever, you're not going to get 100% satisfaction rate immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really brilliant way to put it, right? It's like, it's a lot of compromise. We're all working towards something together, and what meets someone's needs this day might not need it the next. And that like, we all have to sort of understand that collective vision. And so as we're sort of nearing the end of our conversation here, I'm wondering so we're talking to students here who may or may not know what stage management is, or may or may not have done stage management, but perhaps finds this really interesting and wants to pursue it further. What are some skills, experiences, or education that you think are really pivotal to your toolbox, right, as a stage manager?
I think what's really beautiful about stage management is that you do not need a formal education to be a stage manager. You could very much graduate high school and learn on the job, learn on the field. You do not have to go to school for this. And even if you do go to school for something else, the skills are transferable in terms of like scheduling, people skills, like how are you talking to human beings? How are you respecting human beings? Like listening more than talking. I feel like there's a lot of soft skills. It's like keeping yourself calm, knowing how to deal with stress, which, you deal it with in a lot of different fields. So someone who became a doctor or a lawyer could probably be a really good stage manager if they know how to apply their skills in a really good way, because you're working in a really high stress environment. And as long as you know how to deal with that stress, that's quite a bit of what you need to be a stage manager. There's also, everybody has their different brand of stage management. So it's like, whatever your personality is, finding how that best serves a production, like knowing how to put yourself into your work, I think is really important in terms of like who you are as a human being and your values. I think communication skills, again, so many departments deal with this. So you really couldn't go to school for anthropology and then become a Broadway stage manager. Like if you work for it, yes, like I think it's totally possible. In terms of like hard skills, I think that like calling a show, it kind of reminds me of like driving personally, because you have to be aware of like every window in a car, and yet you're also driving and you're also like doing your own thing on your own end. It feels like that. It's like a technological like awareness. There's also like more it's hard to find like overlaps in terms of like the actual work itself. But if you know how to use Excel, that's wonderful. If you know how to use Word, great. Google Sheets, awesome. Like if you're great with the computer, there are so many great things that you can use with your technological knowledge of a regular laptop that can be ingrained into stage management. Because if you're really good on Excel, you can make some really good paperwork that will ultimately be used in a production. The quicker you are at it, the better you'll be able to get information. And then there's like, like being in a rehearsal room, there are a lot of little details that you have to be aware of, like making sure everything looks neat, making sure that the hospitality is set up, making sure that you are able to jump when the transition is happening in the rehearsal, and making sure that you change all the stuff, like all of those specific things, I think you can learn as long as you listen and as long as you observe. What's really beautiful about stage management is that you can just pick it up the more you do it, which I think is really accessible. And I think a lot of people in the community are aware of that and don't restrict opportunities because they know that it's accessible. And there's a lot of mentorship and a lot of like teaching happening on the job, which just comes with the job, like it just happens. So that's really beautiful that you're constantly learning and you're constantly have these mentors to guide you to what you need to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you're talking about stage management. It's like there's so many hard skills and soft skills that can be learned through other avenues, and like education may supplement that in some ways, but there is a lot of really great on the job training, opportunity to learn and from different aspects. That's really great. Well, as we're closing in on the end of our conversation here, I want to ask if there's anything else that you want to make sure we talk about when it comes to stage management that we haven't covered, or that you want to impart on people who might be interested in it. And if the answer is I've said everything, that's fine too.
I think one thing that I kind of hinted at is in order to get a job in stage management, there is no one way. Like you do not, while there might be some posts that are like required by equity to post on the equity website of like, hey, we have an opening in this show, that you don't really get jobs by applying to those things. It's not like a general job where you can just apply online and then get an interview, and then that does happen, but it's not super common. And traditionally, to get a job in stage management in New York City and in DC too, I think, you just have to meet everyone, meet people, talk to people, listen to people, reach out. Like I am a shy person and it is hard, but you have to like reach out and make connections and have conversations and get your name out there and say, I want to do this job. Great. I'm going to email the company that's doing it, the general management company. And I'm going to email this person. How do I get their email? Oh, I'm going to ask this person that I know because I think they've worked with them before. And like, just ask around. Like, it's not, things will come to you. Yes. But don't rely on that. Like always be working, always be talking to people. Make sure like it really is like networking central. And I don't think that gets talked about a lot. It's kind of like you can't just go to an audition call the way that an actor does. And you don't have an agent the way that an actor does. Like you are your own person, and you have to be able to get yourself connected to those people who are hiring, and making those connections, and really securing those relationships so that you can work on what you ultimately want to work on. So yeah, just talk to people is the big thing of how to get jobs and how to get your foot in the door. And it's totally possible. Even if you don't know, if you feel like you don't know anyone, there's always a way in. And I recommend that to all my friends all the time. I tell them, do the math. You want to do the show? Okay, great. Let's work backwards. Let's connect the dots. Let's see who's on it. And that's, in my opinion, that's 90% of how you get the job, is figuring out who's on it, making a connection. And then if you're the right fit, then you're the right fit. But yeah, I've learned that, and it's been so helpful, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful note to end on too, right? In this collaborative artistry of theater that we've gotten ourselves into, that it is community, right? It is about sort of who you can talk to, who you can be in community with, who you want to be in community with in a lot of ways too. So I think that's a really beautiful ending point for us. Yeah. So Maria, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise. All, of course, best wishes for a long, good run for Cabaret. But I know that you have shows to run off and do and work to accomplish. So we'll let you go. Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you so much, Lindsay.